In this tutorial, we're going to take a look at making an animated GIF in Photoshop. So for this tutorial, we'll need our toolbar, the layer window, and the timeline. The timeline is also a window and is located down towards the bottom of the window menu. So what I've done, I've gone in, I've prepared the files I'm going to use. Each of these elements resides on its own layer. So in order to get started on this, I need to introduce this Photoshop file into my timeline. And that's simply done by clicking on Create Video Timeline. Now, when you first put it on, you'll notice that you're seeing these purplish bars. This is the video editing aspect of the timeline, but we want the GIF timeline. So I'm going to go down to the lower right-hand corner, and I'm going to click on these three little open rectangles. And when I do so, it shows me one image of my Photoshop file. This is the equivalent of a frame. Now, before I start to do anything here, I'm going to take a look at this one frame. You'll notice that by default, it usually sets this for 5 seconds, which means this frame will be on screen for 5 seconds, and that's not my intention. So I'm going to click on that, and I'm going to choose No Delay. Now, there are no buttons available here quite yet, with the exception of this one that resembles our new layer icon from our layer window. This says Add Frames. One other change I'm going to make before I start is over here where it says Once. I'm going to change that to Forever. And what that means is that it will continually loop my animation while I'm developing it. And it will also loop it when I finally export it, which we'll do once we've got our animation the way we want. Next, I'm going to turn off all the layers in my layer window, with exception of the background. I'd like that to be my background on continuously. I'll now go down to the timeline, and I'm going to click on this new frame icon. When I do so, I can start my animation process. I'm going to start by putting on my planet layer. I'm going to select it first, then I'm going to click on the eyeball to introduce it. Now, my intention is to have the planet kind of go across screen from right to left and come to rest where it resides right now. So first thing I'm going to do is open up my work area. I'm just stretching out that gray area that is around the perimeter of my document. And then with my Move tool selected, V, I'm going to go up and I'm going to click on Show Transform Controls. What that means is that if an image in my file appears off the actual image plane, I can still find it in the work area. So that's where I'm going to start this animation. Now I'm going to click and add a new frame, and then I'm going to shift and drag this where I'd like it to be when it stops moving across the screen, like so. You'll notice that once you've introduced a frame, other than the default one, these buttons become available to you. And the ones here are pretty self-explanatory. They allow you to go back and forth in time, frame by frame, and this one we can play our animation. Now, I'd like to add the frames in between where I started off screen and where I would like it to be when it ends. And I'm going to use a thing called the tweening button. Next to the new frame icon, just to the left, is a small icon with some graduatingly smaller rectangles. When I click on that, I get this tweening option. All I need to do is change the frames to add to the number I'd like. The more the frames, the slower this will move across screen. So I'm going to pick the number 30, and I'll hit OK. And you'll see now that your timeline has generated those 30 extra frames. So if I were to play this now, my planet sails across and goes to the left-hand side. Now, because I set it for forever, it will continually loop. So I'm going to stop my animation, and I'm going to go with the very last frame to add the next element. This Photoshop application is a very, very simple process, So you have to be careful that you add your elements, your animated elements, in a linear fashion, one after the other consecutively. Right? So now I'm going to have the little drone boy come across the screen from the left-hand side. So I'm selecting drone boy. I'm clicking on his eyeball to turn him on, and I'd like him to come from the upper left-hand corner. I'll add a new fresh frame, and in that new frame I'll simply drag him across. Now I don't want him to, I would like him to kind of hover in the middle but then go off again. So I'm going to start by having him sail right through my composition window. And once again, now I'm going to go to that little tweening button, those little rectangles. He's going about the same distance as the planet, so I'll leave it at 30 frames and I'll hit add. So if I were to play this now, I'm going to see that he's just going to sail through as I want initially. Okay, now that's pretty good. But what I'd like to do is I would like to have him stop in the middle and hesitate for 2 or 3 seconds before he continues on. So I'm going to locate the frame in which I think he's kind of in the middle. And 49 looks pretty good. So at 49, I'm going to go down to the timeline, and where it says 0 seconds, I'm going to click on the frame, and I'm going to choose Other. In there, I can put the number 3, which is the equivalent of 3 seconds. I'll click OK. And what that means now is if I was to go back a bit in time and then play my animation, he's going to stay on screen for 3 seconds and then sail off again. So that's pretty good. I'm going to stop him. And now I'm going to add a text element. And I'm going to have the text element fade in on screen. So again, I'm going to go to the very last frame of my animation. And there's a couple of ways you can look at your timeline. You can maximize it by dragging on it. You can minimize it. And when you start to minimize it, you're going to see this gray bar that lets you navigate back and forth across the length of your animation. So I'm going to the last frame of my animation, and I'm going to turn on my text element. And I've got it kind of where I'd like it to be. So in this instance, I want it to fade on, stay on screen for about 3 seconds, and then fade off. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go up to the layer window. And when I have my text layer selected, I now have the option to zero out the opacity. So I'll change the opacity to 0. I'll now add a blank frame. And in this blank frame, I'll bring the opacity of my text back to 100%. Now, just like movement across the screen, I want to click on this little tweening button and add the amount of frames in which I would like it to fade in at. So I'm going to change this to 15, not quite so long. I'll click OK. And now I'll move back in time a bit. Let's say I'll just go back to where I don't see my text on screen. I'll play my animation. And now it fades on. Now it's kind of abrupt, the way it keeps looping, and it doesn't quite seem seamless as I'd like it to be. So all I'm going to do now is I'm going to stop the animation. And I'm going to locate the very last frame. And here, I'm going to add a new frame, and I'm going to change the opacity back to 0. Now, I'm at frame 81, and that's going to be important because once I change this to fade out, I want to come back and put a hesitation of 3 seconds on the text as well. So that's frame 81. So now I'm going to change the opacity to 0. I'm going to go down to my tweening button. I'll leave it at 15. Now if I play it, the text fades in and fades out pretty quickly, which is close to what I want. But what I really want is for that drone boy to be on screen for a certain amount of time, so I'll stop the animation. I'm going to go to frame 81 as I kind of mentioned earlier. And at 81, once again, I'll click on 0 seconds, and I think I'll choose from the pop-up menu 2 seconds. And I'll hit Command S to save. I'm going to play it to preview it to see if this is what I want. Yeah, that's working pretty good. That's exactly what I'd like this to be. I'm going to stop my movie, and then we'll come back in a moment and we'll export this as an animated GIF.